Hi, I'm Rena, and welcome to Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode, Introduction, Who Are We and What Are We Doing? This is not one of our regularly scheduled weekly podcasts. It's an extra that we're throwing out there with some bits that we cut from episode 19 and starring Pancho Villa as himself. This is some of the material that we deemed to be irrelevant host banter, or cut for time and because it was digressive or repetitive. And starring Pancho Villa as himself remains one of our least downloaded episodes ever, but I cut this over the summer, so I thought I might as well release it. Some of this sounds without context, like we are having a conversation in non sequiturs. So if this is your first time listening, you should probably download one of our regular episodes or our introductory episode to get a better sense of what we're all about. I would especially recommend anything from episode 10, Cobb, onwards, because it took a while to figure out the sound quality and the format. Enjoy! And thank you for spending some of your time with us.
I am sensing a lucrative opportunity for anyone in the publishing industry who is listening to this podcast right now to translate Spanish biographies and make the kind of money that you make when you work in publishing.
Academic publishing houses couldn't be bothered, or I'm sure there are things out there where, yes, if I had an extra $50 to $100 to just buy whatever was available off Amazon or order it through an independent bookstore, better yet, every week, I could actually come into these things with good, pertinent research. But I'm dependent on the library, and the only Pancho Villa biography that I could get was written for a preteen audience. So,
I mean, at least the children are learning. Oh, sorry.
It wasn't on hold or anything, so I can't say they're actually reading. I was able to get it pretty quickly, so I assume they're not reading it.
Well, school's out. It's a surprise element of this experience that I am sharing with you.
There's Pancho, there's Evita. Who else was there?
We talked a bit about James Brown's interred body. I don't know if that made the cut of that episode, but we did talk about the look and feel of his memorial services and his body lying in state at the Apollo.
Yes, and then his body parts being used for paternity tests.
Yeah, like
after he was dead.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I'm
not sure why we need to do this. Why we would care more if we go back 9 years from someone looking at their mail, but okay.
Well, the framing device is all about that kid who got Pancho Villa to be his son's godfather, I guess. Again, I don't care about any of these gringos, if you will, who surround the action of this film and moralize upon it from their Ivy League educated white dude perspective.
Although this is somewhat relatable, I remember being 22 and not having that, oh, you're special, of you went to the fancy school thing anymore, and desperately needing some way, while at a crappy assistant job, to try to show that I was still special. I remember having that kind of insecurity. And maybe I'm being tough on him because I see reflections of my former self.
No, you're not being tough on him. It's obnoxious. Can I tell you my embarrassing confession here?
Mm-hmm.
So D.W. Griffith shows up, and he is played by Colm, who I'm guessing is on one of your dragon shows. Is he on one of your dragon shows, like with your Game of Thrones or your House of the Dragons or whatever? I was like, he's got to be on a dragon show or something, whatever. I have been laboring under the illusion my entire life that D.W. Griffith looked like W.C. Fields. So as soon as Colm shows up, I'm like, what the hell kind of casting is this? He looks nothing like him. And then I Googled it and I realized, oh, I've been thinking, I know that they're two different people and they did two different things, but I've somehow conflated the appearance in such a way that I was very surprised that he wasn't drunk or elderly.
It's okay, Sarah. They're both dwems that we're accustomed to seeing in black and white with a W in their initials.
Thank you for absolving me of my embarrassment. D.W. Griffith is originally asked to direct this movie, but he's got to go make Birth of a Nation. Thanks, Griffith, for, re-elevating the Klan in America. We appreciate you.
My takeaway from this was that the life of Pancho Villa being seven reels long was what made him realize he could make Birth of a Nation.
That's a good call out. That's very possible. I was under the impression that this movie clearly wasn't for me and occasionally lost my attention when we were spending time with these guys navigating the film industry, which shocked me how bored I was by that.
But it was fun. I mean, asking questions that Hearst is paying them to ask, but they are by and large emotionally undisturbed at the idea that they are essentially making a snuff film before that term existed. Early 20th century audiences were very unsophisticated. And for an example, did you know anything about Buster Keaton's family act, the three Keatons that he starred in with his parents before signing on with Fatty Arbuckle?
I know that there's something screwed up about it, but that's the extent to which I remember that, but I remember literally nothing else.
The Three Keatons was an onstage act consisting of Buster, his dad, Joe, and his mother, where what would happen is Buster's dad would beat the shit out of him on stage. While Buster would run away, trying to hide under things or get away from his dad, and his dad would just beat the crap out of him while his mother stood there going, "Oh no! Oh no!" And this would go on for 5 or 10 minutes or whatever the interval was that acts had in vaudeville. And audiences thought this was hilarious. They would laugh their heads off at a kid getting beaten up. Now, Sarah Bernhardt, smart Jewish lady, said, "This is child abuse. I'm calling whatever pathetic version of child services you have." I can just see someone on Drunk History copying what I'm saying and having her saying, "I'm calling whatever pathetic version of child services you have here in the early 20th century." But yeah, she was onto it until one day when Buster was about 16, he finally punched back at his dad. And I mean, his dad was great at beating him up. His dad could do this flying into the air hitch kick. And so for the next 2 years, until Buster signed with Fatty Arbuckle, the Three Keatons act consisted of Buster and his dad beating each other up on stage. But that was how he learned to keep the great stone face, to not show emotion when his father was beating him up in front of crowds of people laughing their heads off. It wasn't that he didn't hurt, and I'm sure he did learn ways of tensing himself to try to make it hurt less, but that was how he learned to keep that poker face while facing incredible pain in doing all of those stunts. Because there are stories there's a film where he's in a 20-foot rock slide and he actually did throw himself down that rock slide. Or there was one point where he just kept filming in great pain and they found out, oh yeah, he cracked a vertebrae. It was because that was how he'd learned to hold that face. But I'm telling this drawn out story as an example of this is how unsophisticated audiences work. If you watch a lot of reality TV, audiences are still super unsophisticated. I'd like to think that there's stuff where we'd be somewhat wiser to it. I don't know if a reality TV version of the Three Keatons would sell big these days. I really can't.
We have it.
Oh, great.
We have it. Believe me, we have many opportunities to watch many varieties of that. I feel so unsafe now. That story was really upsetting. Poor Buster Keaton. I mean, that explains some things about him. We watch people beat each other up on the regular now on television. I mean, I don't, but other people do.
Also, so going back to and starring Pancho Villa as himself from that little tour into, I guess, about barely a decade later into the history of filmmaking, we see those hand-cranked cameras like we saw in Nope.
Yeah. Well, there was that French guy. Do you remember that French guy who went to meet with Pol Pot and was all like, Pol Pot's the best? And 2 hours later, he was executed by Pol Pot.
It's great. I want to see that in real time, and I want this to just be a comedy about what a dummy this guy is.
Don't traffic yourself into revolutionary movements. It's not a great idea. That shit's complicated.
I feel like that's a case of white guilt being fatal, and this is a case of like some British guy with a ranch who thinks that he's all like suave and badass with his scarf, discovering, no, these people think they have a right to my stuff, and oh, crud. I feel like we're forgetting there are so many sequences in this around Banderas that are so much fun. And those parts are, I don't know. This is like part of why I made a rule that I broke about we are not allowed to talk about the movie before we talk about it on the podcast. Because my first reaction was, this is a forgotten gem. And you were like, I don't like the white people and I have frustrations. And I was like, oh yeah, the white people are kind of a bummer. It's so, because it's like, I feel like when we do that, we pull each other toward a center of gravity that maybe we'd wind up with anyway on the, in making the averages, but we lose separate perspective in reminding each other of things we might not have noticed. He unintentionally reminds me of Joe Cotton's character in The Third Man.
Oh, that's a good call.
I don't think they meant it to be that way, because if they had, they would have called it better, that this guy is a cipher.
That's actually a really good call. And they made him that way on purpose in that movie. But this is just, it feels like he's supposed to be entree, but he's not interesting enough.
Time-wise, this movie came out while, yes, 9/11 had happened, but we're still in the glow of having won the Cold War. Why are you sentimentalizing John Reed when we're still in that space of time where we knew better than to romanticize a commie?
I think it was, it was to help sort of flesh out the Thayer characters, such as it is. But I'm gonna always roll my eyes at John Reed, because John Reed's always gonna make me think of Warren Beatty, who is as insufferable as a communist. I was reminded watching this because I was thinking, like, do I dislike John Reed because I dislike Warren Beatty? And then I stopped caring about it because I was just like, I don't care about either of these people. There were just so many other ways that you could have entered this movie and spent more time with some of these delightful little performances. And
right. Like, I don't care about, wait a minute. He, not only did he have this brilliant idea, he had nepotism going for him. Why does this person disappear then? Is it because he has this disillusionment? And really, I don't care, but there was so much else going on here that was fun and intriguing and original, even in the idea of, let's tell this story of the infancy of filmmaking and how many of the stereotypes that we have are born, and the nature of war and how modern humans view violence.
There's something so interesting, too, about the fact that this was some of our earliest film propaganda that would be attached along with Birth of a Nation, where you see the power of filmmaking and what it's capable of in terms of telling a story. And that's interesting. I feel like the movie just didn't find a way to stick the landing.
Yeah, but remember that line from our favorite racist Woodrow Wilson about that movie, Birth of a Nation, where he said, this is history writ with lightning.
Of course he said that.
Yeah, this is like the beginning of big storytelling. Yeah, so for acting and casting, I gave it an 8 because I'm normally very good about chipping off for people, but there were too many good, fun performances, cameo to lead sized, that were so memorable. And also, if you want to think, there's like 5 years between Gia and this, and if you look at how the scope and sophistication and ambition of HBO's filmmaking had blossomed since then, I think this is very good evidence. They make great use of the huge budget that they have. But there were still Civil War veterans all over the place at the start of filmmaking. Like, the first biopics of Abe Lincoln came out around this time, but the people watching that, some of them might have seen, like, there would have been people who could tell that actor, this is what I saw Lincoln from a distance, I heard Lincoln give a talk, this is what it was like.
Isn't that wild? Yeah. The costumes looked really good and were really accurate to the time. And, and to your point about HBO, like the scope and ambition of this project as compared to both in terms of like the maturity of the filmmaking and what we're looking at and sort of the ambition of the storytelling, like it really shows how quickly HBO progressed into creating prestige television.
I think this can be seen as like a marker of their evolution moving into peak TV, because when this comes out, Mad Men is not that far down the pipeline. Sopranos is already a huge deal. HBO has been making prestige things, and it's also at a point where they're starting to say TV has never been better, but there's still like a decade where it keeps getting better for a while. Breaking Bad is only a few years away.
As I've made it abundantly clear, Bruce Beresford is not my cup of tea, but he is a prestige filmmaker. And to bring him into television at this point in time is a big deal. To bring Larry Gelbart, who, while he did write TV, he also wrote a lot of movies, and big movies. To bring him in to write a television movie is a giant sea change. Like, this is.
I think this was Larry Gelbart's last project, if you look at his listings. So that was another thing I loved about the idea of this, is that he picks this project that goes back to the very beginning, but tells how all of these ideas that we have about it are there from the get-go.
Yeah. I mean, it's like last week with Gotti, where I'm like, the criminal shouldn't be telling the criminal lawyer about Rico. The criminal lawyer, if you're hiring them to keep you out of jail because you're part of the mafia in the 90s, should know about Rico. They should have some familiarity with it. Okay. There are great little gems of performances from Arkin and from Michael McKean and the various stars of Dragon shows and Jim Broadbent that I really enjoyed seeing. And I like seeing them having fun and being lively in this movie. And certainly, like, Banderas made it sing and made the role sing, and I thought that he was wonderful. So yeah, I think, like, straight down the middle. It is very much the case that all of the people around this story are interesting, and it's interesting to see, like, a Raoul Walsh early on, who he would go on to play John Wilkes Booth in Birth of a Nation.
Oh,
yeah.
I did not know that.
Nobody knew at the time what a mess that was going to be.
I would like to read some studies into why was the South the more engaging storyteller to the mass audience when the North was, not only did it have a greater population to go see movies, the North were the good guys.
People love that lost cause shit with the Civil War. I don't know if you've ever watched Ken Burns' The Civil War. I'm sure you have. I know the answer to that. You've watched that. You're smart. But is it Shelby Foote, the historian? He is just like jerking off the whole time to like Robert E. Lee and like the romanticism of these men saving the South from the tyranny of not making people work themselves to death for them to preserve some sort of culture. People are just weird about that. I don't get it either. First of all, like William Tecumseh Sherman, like if I could bring him out of his grave, I would totally hook up with him. I love him. And I love what he did to end that war.
Yeah, we know from what Pancho Villa is pointing out is that, like, yeah, Grant was kind of a bad guy in Mexico, but it's this story of this drunk whose career is dead, who comes from behind, and despite being all these irresponsible things, saves everyone's ass. And that line of Lincoln, like, tell me what General Grant is drinking. So what did he say? Tell me what General Grant is drinking so that I can send 10 cases of it to the rest of my generals. I don't think I had the quantity of booze right. Maybe it has something to do with that every woman, I know there are exceptions, but every woman wants to be a princess. And that image of the plantation owner's daughter on the big white columned porch in the big floofy dress, we look at that and we want to be her.
Yeah, but no, to Pancho Villa's point in all of this, none of these generals from the Civil War on either side, like none of their histories bear up under scrutiny around what they were doing before and after the Civil War to other people.
They're men in the 19th century. However bad our great-grandparents and grandparents' generations that went to see these Lost Cause movies were, it gets worse. Yeah, everyone would get canceled today.
When they weren't preserving the Union, like even My Precious Sherman, they were doing very bad things to Native Americans. They were doing very bad things in the battles in California. Like they were all doing like terrible stuff.
Over time, there's something to be done here with watching how the portrayal of Custer has evolved, because They Died with Their Boots On is gripping, but so off.
Well, that's another one where I'm like, why are we romanticizing? Like, we're weird in this country when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, we are going to do They Died with Their Boots On at some point, though, and there will be talk about what is up with this, because yes, Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland are absolutely dashing, and oh good God, no, I want the Native Americans to win.
But also, right. What's fun too is that we were talking about people watching battles. As we were talking about that, I was realizing, oh my gosh, and think about like we were watching the Gulf Wars on CNN.
Yeah, gosh, I had to watch They Died with Their Boots On for a film class, and there's this one thing where there's this guy who has been naysaying Custer the whole time, who, as they're in that like little I don't know if you could, where that thing where the circle the whole thing gets smaller and smaller, he dies telling Custer, "You were right."
That's like
it still gets you on your wavelength, that movie. That I enjoyed that.
A good story is a good story. I haven't seen that, but I'm sure that the way they frame it is these horrible Indians were just murdering people for getting on their land, and how dare they?
It's been a long time since I've seen it, but I guess it is on our list of like 500 different movies or so, so I'm sure we'll get to it sometime in the next 10 years.
Yes. I'm personally very excited to see Reagan get one over on that evil Dalton Trumbo, and then for Reagan to get one over on that horrible villain Jimmy Carter. Just all these bad people that he vanquished against all odds. I'm excited to bear witness, and I'm excited to have a conversation about Dennis Quaid's assertion that Facebook isn't advertising the movie because they're afraid of it.
I don't know how I'm going to get through this movie. I think you may wind up taking all the notes, because I'm going to curl up in a fetal position in the very empty theater on the floor with my fingers in my ears and my eyes shut to make it go away.
I have a question. I have another prediction to ask you or speculate about, and I'm wondering if this will be the case. Do you think we will be alone in the theater?
If we aren't, I'm curious as to who else could possibly be there. I don't know if it's possible to watch it at one of the places where there are people who yell at the screen, because I could get into some screen yelling.
Oh, God. The days of the Court 12, like, I'm so sad that is gone.
It's gone?
Court Street 12, yeah, they closed.
No.
I know. That would have, listen, if I had a choice as to where we were going to see Reagan, that was it.
I guess it's not, I mean, it's probably not playing at the Magic Johnson cinemas.
We can certainly check.
Although that is like so far from where we live, though, and such a long trip both ways.
We can see if it's playing out in Bay Ridge, and I can drive us.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But is Bay Ridge a place where people yell at the screen?
I feel like it's more likely than they would at like an Alamo Draft House.
What we really want is to get this over with after work on Friday so we can talk about it on Saturday, and then I want to never think about it again. I want to vomit. I am looking forward to this less than any other movie we have ever talked about. I was excited to watch The Conqueror.
I had a 3-day weekend once years ago where I finally got around to watching The Day After, miniseries about nuclear war, the Friday afternoon of that 3-day weekend, and it really put a damper on the weekend, and I'm wondering if this is going to do the same.
Well, that was the 9th edition of Irrelevant Host Banter. And starring Pancho Villa as himself is sort of forgotten, but it has a terrific performance from Antonio Banderas, and about half of the supporting cast is very good. It's streaming on Max, so it's well worth checking out if you have Max. If you liked the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is @Biopic, a podcast story. We also have accounts on Threads and Bluesky. Please also check out our webpage at Biopic, a podcast. Please also check out our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com to see the official episode ratings for all of the movies that we've done so far. If you would like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com. Have an excellent week or weekend, and we hope you'll listen in when our regular episode drops on Tuesday. And good night to the earnest and the cynical.